Recording has started.
Okay. Yeah, let me give a disclaimer that, hey, everybody, it's Tal Griffin. I'm here with James Bartlett and Julie Hess, and I'm Tal Griffin. This is a disclaimer as that this goes with no affiliation, but however, this may lean towards Jedi and can be used in Christian beliefs, that this is for self-development and growth along the path and the winding river, and how we may grow and develop ourselves as a person and become better than we were to become who we want to be. So again, we do not take an affiliation with anybody recognizes anything other than just being a human being, and will be treated respectfully as such. So with that being said, people, as we were discussing,
and we're not taking any kind of political sides, be it one or the other, trying to do the down the middle routine.
Right. We're taking this as the topic of discussion as itself.
So next, what were we talking about?
In a way, diplomacy.
What about it?
Is that in diplomacy, you're looking out for both sides and how it might deal with one being the diplomat, but also possibly the guardian, because of how you're looking out for the best interest of both parties and to prevent. So
now, there's two different scenarios in which I can think of where diplomacy comes into play. Actually, there's more, but where it would be where the situation would be super intense.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in a criminal situation, like a hostage situation, where you're dealing with the criminal element who's got hostages, and you're trying to de-escalate the situation and to get them to surrender, and where as few lives or collateral damage is sustained. You know, it's saving as many lives and as little collateral damage.
Yeah.
Also, you can take it from the political perspective, where you've got one side opposing the other side, and how do you meet in the middle in order to procure the best outcome for all concerned?
Yeah.
So diplomacy in those capacities is very, very intense, and it's very hard to do. And the difference of how a person goes at it as a guardian versus a sentinel versus a consular is not the same.
Right. It's the sentinel would be the person that would have the gathered information to let those that would be involved in the later, depending on what action is chosen, that information would be relayed. And they're kind of the spy per se, the espionage part. And that takes a very independent role. Someone who can work and operate in a independent capacity, but still fulfill the description and duty of that task. And so the skills might be needed if one is found out. They would have to be able to, in a way, negotiate their way,
talk their way out of trouble.
Yeah, to make a deal. Okay. But in that, it would all still be self-serving in what they need to do, because their objective is I need to do this to fulfill my responsibilities to the powers that be that are above me, that I have been tasked by. And so normally, as a rule, they tend to avoid and operate more in the background and in the shadows. They can be the person in the crowd, or can maybe find a way to get into the group or just by observing, or collect information under, just by sneaking in, the spy type role per se. So, and you're collecting the dirty laundry on the guy or the person you're gathering or group. So
one of the keys when it comes to information to diplomacy is getting as much information as you possibly can from both sides of the coin. Why is this guy ticked off? And this guy's ready to kill the other one. You know, and how do you get them to come and sit down and talk without violence or or some other kind of
right with that
but the key to that is having as much information about the situation from various perspectives and so forth. So next.
Yeah, and see, that goes with like how to de-escalate, or what is it going to take to de-escalate, to get both people to be able to sit down. And
there has to be a commonality.
Yes, there has to be a common interest, which generally is that, do we really want this conflict? But we're willing to do this, but we don't want to. We do, but if we feel we must, then we will. But however, I have to look out for the people. And generally, there is a bargaining chip somewhere in there. And where a lot of that comes in is the empathy, being empathetic towards each person's needs. And that's where we understand by putting the shoe on the other foot.
Well, see, that's something I like to teach about is perspective and perception. They're not the same.
No. Yeah, one is.
And when you can understand those two terminologies and how they apply to an individual situation, now you've got a foundation to build the knowledge upon to begin to be diplomatic and try to de-escalate a very tense or hot or even a very volatile situation.
Yeah, and how we perceive something can define how we interpret it. And that the overall perception is the understanding of overall. So we're looking at one as a personal view, and you're looking at, and then what is the overall, the perceiving, and then the perception. So they are two totally different. One is of the person, and one is of the situation as a whole. And finding out through there is, along with being empathetic towards each party, there's also a matter of compassion with this. But yet you are still playing the devil's advocate for both people, for both sides.
Absolutely.
And because you have to be able to call out the person and going, I understand that this has been a practice of yours.
The pros and cons from both sides.
Exactly. And so those are leverages. But you do it in a way that basically if I'm understanding right, that causes the person to consider what they're doing and what they're willing to not do.
See,
And that's
any leader needs to know his strengths and weaknesses, and that in any conflict, the same thing is true.
yeah.
When I was in the military, they told us, in basic training, we would have to, that it was important to know our enemy as far as their strength, their weaknesses, how many people they got, what kind of equipment, where they're at, where they're stationed at, where they've got camped, are they in a strategically strong place or not, and then how can we capitalize on this situation versus this one or whatever. And that's where the reconnaissance and gathering all the information we can. So, once you know one person's strengths and their weaknesses, and you go to the other side, you know their strengths and weaknesses. Now you got to find a way to strengthen the weakness on this one, and strengthen the weakness on this by using those strengths to help.
Yeah, and
if that makes sense.
That does, but I think also that what is the culture of the person you're going to be negotiating with, or the parties you're going to be negotiating? What does their culture say by their intent or their plan of intent? Understanding that.
Even if you live side by side, you've got two communities that live side by side. Let's say urban. Well, sometimes even there's three.
Yeah.
You've got urban, suburban, and rural.
Right.
You got three different cultures. How do you make that? And they're side by side. Because you've got, for an example, Houston, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
You've got that is a huge metropolitan urban area.
Mm-hmm.
But there are several suburbs or suburban areas that is in surrounding Houston.
Right.
And which is the suburban is a slight urban versus rural setting. But then you go a few miles in whatever direction, and you've got countryside. You got the rural where the city life does not mix.
No, it's
like a whole different country.
Yeah, it's almost, I'm going to use this word loosely, like a subculture.
Exactly.
And so how their response or views or perception are going to be different, which is very pragmatic, very logical, very realistic in their approach, because of you have to look out for what is the production of my farm, what's the production of my crop, what's the production of my livestock.
And then you got, even in the rural where you've got in Texas, and I have to throw a disclaimer in here, this is not to be offensive, this is not to be throwing down upon anybody or anything. This is just an example that most people in the country know about.
I'll let you slide on that one, James.
Thank you. Love you too. But even the rural community, you've got, in Texas, you've got some farmland, you've got some, as far as the crops, you got people who's got livestock, and then you got oil.
Right. Yes.
Those are three different cultures.
Yeah, because with the oil companies, they're in it to how are we going to gain production and revenue. All right.
That's three different subcultures in the rural section that is going to totally throw a monkey wrench when you're dealing with the suburbans and the urban cultures.
Yeah, because you're going to, if say that oil company wants to put a oil pump on that guy's land, how do you think that guy is gonna react and think about you're wanting to put something on my land that's going to disrupt it, that's going to disturb it? And how detrimental is it going to be to my livestock or to my crops?
Exactly.
And say, for example, hunt. Some farmers, or a lot of farmers, do indeed like to hunt on their property, provided they've got enough land. How is this going to affect that? Because that is a harvest and a source of food that's to be put on the table.
Yep.
How is this going to disrupt that? So how would one, as evasively as possible, put in an oil pump on somebody's land and not disturb it? Or how, if it is, how is that land going to recover? How is the natural element of that land going to resume? Because some animals, once they're scared away,
They're gone.
they're very gun shy or shy of returning.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that farmer or that person that owns that land is going to be really happy about that?
Certainly not.
So how would one negotiate a compensation to that farmer?
Understanding the circumstances on both sides. You know, of course, you got to make a profit. The oil company's got to make a profit. But how do they do what they got to do without disturbing the land in question to minimize the risk or to mitigate those problems that are created, and to compensate for the loss of the livestock, the hunting game, or the crops that is affected by during the time that the oil company is doing what they're doing on that land.
Right. And this is where, say, like back to the Sentinel, this is where that guy, that person would go in and go, Farmer Brown, arbitrary name here, what's his routine? What's the area? What is his routine? What is the production? What are his habits? What is his lifestyle? And if the oil company is to put a rig, a pump on his property, how is this going to disrupt that? What are we going to need to do to appease this individual? Because we're talking about something very personal to a farmer. That's their livelihood. That's their living. That's their life. That's what defines what they do. And in a way, who they are. And I could be wrong about that, but most farmers or people that own land that I've been in contact with take it very personal.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll give you an example. Religion,
Mm-hmm.
and also family heirship. This land has been in my family for generations, and you ain't going to do anything to mess it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it's just like, how do you get past that?
You have to go, what can I do to compensate?
Precisely.
And that word is, in today's environment, compensation is, I'm going to use this word and I hope I don't get dinged for it, been bastardized
Woo-hoo-hoo!
in its use.
Yeah.
It's been redefined as in I am owed because of previous doings. And I'm not trying to start a I don't want to start a debate on any of that, and it's not my intentions to offend anybody that might hear this and take that in the wrong way, and by no means offending anybody in that statement. But
See, what we're talking about here is a lot of times because of the rural community that we're
Mhm.
talking about those 3 different types, or actually 4 when you take in the hunting aspect of it or the sporting, which you can also include fishing and whatever else.
mhm.
A lot of times the urban people are clueless
Mhm.
about these factors. But then at the same time, those in the rural community are clueless about what's going on in the urban.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I live where I
And
live.
it's hard to juggle
Yeah.
that stuff
Yeah,
sometimes.
and where I live in this, they say it's a city, but I call it a town because I grew up in a major metropolitan area in city, and this is very much a small community, so I call it a town. But
Yep.
it's classified as a city, which okay. So, and I used to live in a town that's about 25 minutes that is a farming rural community. And so the culture here, there is more interaction, though not a lot. Are the elements of it is more, there's a underlying element that is present that you can tell is there, but unless you know the details about it, um, you just you go on about your day.
Mm-hmm.
So in gathering how that culture is in both areas, because out in the town I used to live in about 6 years ago, it's a very quiet, sleepy area because it's a farming community. And that the person I had a family type relationship with, for example, there was a person who would come onto his land and supposedly hunt and or just get on there and just misbehave. Well, in that there is a unwritten rule with farmers that if anything that does not belong, that is uninvited, say your pet or you as a person, shall be dealt with. Now, how, I'm not going to go into. Just kind of use your imagination. So the culture there, how do you think that oil company would be responded to by that culture and unwritten rule of thumb?
I wouldn't want to be there.
Okay, so this
Billy,
is
what do
where
you think?
Usually, oil companies give farmers commissions for allowing them to drill oil on their land.
okay.
but a lot of times those commissions are not covering all the cost to the person in question.
It depends on how much they're drilling.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times there's EPA issues that surface later that are not covered initially.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole plethora of other issues that sometimes that surface that, that, and it can get real sticky.
Mm-hmm. Say, for example, a scenario, say that pump starts to leak, which can happen.
Mhm.
It's mechanical. It's got seals, which are supposed to prevent any leakage.
Mhm.
Say it starts to contaminate the man's property and land.
Poison.
Yeah. So how is he? How
Crops
is it?
die, animals die.
Mm-hmm. So how is that to be negotiated into the process? What's the contingency plan?
Generally, lawsuit.
Generally, but in the negotiations, how is one to hopefully, in the optimistic way,
Avoid all that.
avoid? How can they ensure that won't happen?
By not allowing.
Yeah.
Okay. But however, say that farmer, say, is going to receive a very healthy commission. What is that farmer willing to compromise on? What would compensate that farmer? What would be in his best interest? It's a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
What would, by all means, offset the loss of that farmer not being able to continue
Farming.
farming, or disrupt it, hold him up, which
means
means,
a loss of money.
yes, his income. Now, here's the opposing proposition. Say if it were bad enough, or in the contingency that they were to relocate that farmer and show that this would be a profitable and production of resources for the farmer, and him be able to resume. But on the second hand, do you think his livestock is going to adapt and adjust? They might.
Not likely.
So in that, what could be negotiated in a
Good
worst
question.
case scenario? In a worst case scenario,
Without knowing the actual industries themselves on both sides of the fence, it would be very, very hard for us
mm-hmm.
to come to a clear, probable answer.
Mm-hmm. Because
but these are extremely good questions that a person might run into, and this is only just on one side of the fence.
exactly.
And on one scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But what if it's political? What if it's a corporate thing? What if it's a, religious, issue or whatever? There's a whole plethora of different parameters for each one of these type of situations.
Mm-hmm.
And we just basically covered just tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, and these are just the preliminary. This is the preliminary information gathering of the company, the corporation wants that property, wants to drill there because of the economic growth of that company and reputation and the delivery of a product. And so thus the economic growth for that company, for investors too, they have something on the line too. They've got their reputation on the line. They've got a guarantee. So
And then you got the government watchdogs on both sides of the fence, watching both sides.
Yeah.
To make sure that everything's done legally.
Exactly. And so how does one negotiate this? How is the diplomatic solution to take part? What is needed to take part, to give both what they want? Because a farmer, if he feels he's being wronged,
oh boy,
will by chance get very passionate and protective of his property. And by means of with a lot of people in that area and that type of life, your word is your bond. It doesn't matter if it's a contract or not, signed or not. Your word is your bond. You told me, so therefore, I'm taking you on your word, and I expect you to uphold that. And how far is that farmer willing to go to cause that to happen? How do we want to prevent that in his best interest as well? And the corporation's best interest as well, where both can profit and benefit from this.
Now, here's another little aspect. We're talking about two industries, farming and oil. But what about the individuals? Joe Farmer,
How's this going? Yeah.
And then you've got these oil executives, their representatives or whatever. Who are they? What kind of a reputation do they have?
Right. Are they going to be a man of their word and a corporation of their word? Is that person that is proposing, or the owner, the CEO?
And then, of course, Joe Farmer, is he a hothead that likes to shoot first and ask questions later?
Yeah.
So you not only have to know the industries in question, but the individuals.
Yeah, do
your homework.
Yeah, when I was living out in the rural town, yeah, and the person that was in a family type of relationship, okay, there was one night actually, where he and I went out with night vision and watched his neighbor. And we had to use the correct terms by standards, is a hole puncher with a night vision optic on it. So this is how passionate farmers and landowners can be. Okay. And how protective they are of their property. Because I was asked, can you, if we need to? Of course, what am I supposed to say?
Some are the good old boys that'll give you a handshake and invite you in to have a little bit of dinner and all this. And then the someone says, you get off my property or I'll shoot you.
Right. And so the question I was asked is, hey, are you willing to do this if need be? Well, yeah, this is looking out for his property. I'm a family member per se, right? Just by the marriage at the time. So that's a big responsibility. So from diplomacy, we go to guardianship. We go to guardian. And that, so a farmer is also a guardian. And anybody he asks is also that guardian.
He's
So-
guarding against two-legged and four-legged critters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm talking. I'm guarding. I'm guarding against
Predators.
bipedal and four.
What?
And so
And then you
this
got the insects that are, and
Mhm.
have,
You-
who knows how many legs.
you've got the nuisance. So in that, what has been gathered also, what is that guardian willing to do? What is he willing to risk himself? Because we're talking about the possibility, which I will say is not one that can be rested on easy.
No.
But however, fortunately, nothing did happen, which I'm glad. Because I wouldn't want to live with what might could have, which was very real. But on the other side, one is willing to make this judgment call. So again, fortunately, nothing did happen, because that could be a very messy situation. And there could be a whole escalation. So does the guardian always want to take the action? That's the extreme effort. That's the extreme that's the extreme measure. No. Do they have to make that choice and decision? Oh yeah, by far.
With Jedi, violence is the absolute last resort.
Always. But one in that also may have to go, I have no alternative, even if it is the last resort.
Mhm.
And this is where the guardian, yes, the guardian is prone to metaphorically kick in doors and be less than congenial with people and maybe strong arm, but also in a way intimidate and instill fear. Because if that guardian has a reputation, they are aware of what lengths this person is willing to go without hesitation and total commitment, because of his sworn duty, his obligation. And so we're looking at a far contrast between the diplomacy, the sentinel, and then the guardian. But yet they all play a part. Now
They
the
do.
guardian, yeah. So the guardian also can be a diplomat. Okay. Now, one thing that brings me to this, what brings me to this point is that people look at Green Berets as the people that blow things up, go in and take care of problems. Okay. But they are also diplomats. They go in and negotiate with those and help them also build as well. They help it's what's known as a force multiplier in the production and furthering of the people they are diplomatically helping to avoid any further problems.
Any further escalation.
Yeah, exactly. So they help the people also become self-sufficient in whatever it may be, whether it may be to help build better irrigation systems and communications, or how can we defend ourselves against something that has been traumatizing and disrupting that people's lives. So the guardian is not always in the knee breaker role. He's also the diplomat. But of course, his main purpose is to defend, which means in a way of defense, he is also helping these people develop, which in a way is protection because they can look out for themselves.
That goes back to the old saying, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him to fish, you feed him for a life.
Yeah. So it goes on that old adage. So there are many things that, as James just made a point, that Jedi and Christianity alike do have similarities, though I don't always agree with all the philosophies. But however, I can see validity in both sides.
Yeah.
And I can see where both have a very wholesome integrity to them.
A commonality.
Exactly. For one to grow, but also practice. And
I wasn't trying to bring in Christianity.
No. But it's very much a very true thing. You feed a man for a day, he doesn't learn how to gather for himself. He is dependent.
Yep.
If you teach him how to cast his net and to bait a hook to feed his family or tribe or community, and he can pass that along, guess what? They've become self-sufficient.
For a very long time.
And they know what to look for and how to further their way to provide for their bellies.
And teaching them how to fish if they were on in a fishing environment, potentially, is just one step.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing would be to try to teach them how to farm, to do a little garden.
Agricultural.
To do to raise tomatoes and potatoes and corn and beans.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about
which takes longer to do than catching a fish,
but
it sustains you longer and adds a little more variety, which makes people happier.
Yeah, and so say you have to learn how to raise farm animals. Guess what? The feces and the manure worked right and elements added to it. You then have a very productive fertilizer.
Yep.
And if that soil is already a good production already has a good base and good elements in it, and you add to that, you have the probability of, and so you make the people healthier, which means they will be able to defend themselves and protect themselves and see to their own growth
and not rely on others as much.
Yeah. And so maybe it might come to that with this production that they might actually able to provide for somebody else. So
See, in farming, and this going back to the oil, farming, you have to rotate your crops
mhm, yeah,
from one field to another. So, how long are you going to be here? About a year. Okay, fine. I'll take the year off and I'll put my crops or livestock in this other place over here.
yes. So, and that, say, goats, for example. Okay, goats they will nibble, and sheep will nibble a blade and a section of grass or crop or greenery down to the nub.
Yep.
So, which potentially can cause erosion problems. Okay. So, what does one do? As James suggested, you rotate the crop. Okay. But if they only know how to feed that goat for a day to fatten it up for the meal,
Whoops.
yeah, you've got nothing. And so, but on the other side, okay, let's look at another extreme scenario. Say the person is asking and he's known to ask, plead, and still be able to get his way, but the man is broke. And you tell him no.
That's a recipe for disaster.
But however, is it really a recipe for disaster?
If you're broke and you're hungry, you'll do darn near anything to get something to eat or whatever.
But maybe on a agreement, a negotiation, that say the man's caught stealing and it's known that he's broke, and the person that catches him says, okay, I tell you what I'll do.
We can work with this.
I am aware of your situation. However, I can employ you. Have you actually served that man in justice?
Mm-mm.
Or have you changed his life for the better?
You've improved it.
Though it is understood he may be considered a bit untrustworthy, because you know what he's capable of. You know what he's willing to do. So
You watch it.
you watch him. But if he proves himself, and due to his circumstances,
Then you've got a real deal.
exactly. So this is where, again,
It can be a recipe for disaster if you do it the wrong way, or it could be well, figuratively speaking, a gold mine.
exactly,
Opportunity.
because the guy might end up have been a very highly successful business owner at one time, CEO, but he lost everything.
Which a lot of people back in 2008 did.
Yeah. So you have there a man that is full of knowledge that can benefit your company. So talking with the man, you end up learning about him. And so you've gained trust because of his action. This is where integrity comes in. If the man is of his word and he shows he's worth his word, same thing goes back to that farmer and wanting to drill on his property. And you show you are a corporation of integrity. And in the negotiation, their reputation shows that. Then you have a bargaining chip that will reassure that farmer. But what if that farmer is still hesitant? And he has to consider the impact still, because it's not a light decision. It's like, oh my God, these guys are great. They have a good reputation. They were brought and raised and developed from good, wholesome standings of a moral and ethical procedure and practice.
If
And
you
they are
still have issues that have not been resolved and you have not dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, you still got work to do.
exactly. So, but what can be lived with? What can one compromise here? What are they willing to compromise? Because compromise isn't gaining everything you want. You're still going to have to sacrifice something.
I
Give and
was
take.
about to say that.
A little bit of give and take.
Exactly. But it's for the betterment. Okay. So, how is the one that is being diplomatic supposed to live with the decisions they've helped both come to?
Or they fail to achieve.
And so, how
Have to
does
decide what you're happy with and what you can just live with.
but that person is the gate between both parties. He is
If you're the negotiator and everything goes south and people get hurt or, God forbid, killed,
Mhm.
a lot of negotiators can't live with that.
Yeah. So how is he supposed to make that right?
Some
Does
can,
he-
some can't.
Does he still persist and learn and try to regain trust from both people and to prove himself?
To try and to fail is better than to not try at all.
But that's not always an option
I know that.
in some cases.
But
So
no matter what you do, whether you win or you lose,
Mhm.
if you learn from it, the next situation that comes up, you'll be better prepared. You'll have more experience, a little more wisdom under your belt
Mhm.
than the prior situation.
So in that,
But
so,
what happens when stepping into a situation, it is more trouble if you are negotiating for someone else.
how so?
Well, sometimes with negotiation, if there's a third party that's negotiating, it can cause issues.
Okay, but this is where the one who is negotiating keeps themselves out of it as a person. Their personal views, their personal thoughts are not part of the equation. You're a completely non-biased party.
If you're biased, you don't need to be in that situation.
Mhm.
You need to bow out
Mhm.
because that is what is known as a conflict of interest.
Mhm. So a negotiator, a diplomat, a diplomat emotionally is not invested.
Are we saying that a diplomat wouldn't have goals in?
Didn't say that.
What would be the diplomat's goal? What would be the negotiation's goal?
To walk away
To
from
come to a consensus.
to make it an equitable solution
Mhm.
that is beneficial to all parties concerned.
So his beliefs have no part. Now, if he comes from that culture, okay, which does happen in many cases. Say you have a person that came from a very rundown area, okay, a very hostile area, okay, that's like a third world type country that understands what these people do to survive, okay. He understands that culture and he can explain, okay. But in doing so, he also is in danger because in leaving, he also becomes a target,
Mm-hmm.
which does happen, and it's more often than we know. And believe me, it's, yeah. So, there's a person that is a friend of our family who left his country. Okay. And I'm not going to say his name, but understood the culture of the country that this unit under deployment was going to find an individual who was a part of a terrorist who was a terrorist. So, but in that, he is also a target. He can never return. And he himself is under protection. So he also has to make a decision of my family. What's my future? I can no longer return.
Weigh the cost.
Yes. And say you are somebody who is an outsider and you are looked at in hostility. How do you de-escalate to gain that trust? What do you tell them? How do you convince them?
Well, let's go back to the hostage situation.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. You've got a bad situation.
All right.
This guy's he's a short fuse, unpredictable. He's being predictable that he's unpredictable.
I don't know if I can trust you, man. Why are you here? What do you want from me?
You're trying to save as many lives as you can and minimize collateral damage.
Yeah.
But in the process of getting this guy arrested or taken down,
Yeah.
you have casualties. You've got property damage. You've got casualties.
Yes.
What is an acceptable loss and still be a win?
That's now on one.
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Right.
Okay. You've got, it's a bank situation. It's a good sized bank, you know?
Right.
You've got 50 people in the bank between the employees and the customers. Uh-oh.
That thing is running too well today, or maybe I've got the vents, turned the wrong way. But damn, oops. I'm
Okay.
yeah, I'm catching cold breeze over here.
Ooh.
Yeah, I might be able to cut glass here. I don't know.
Cool your jets, okay. But well, I just rippled
I love this, dude. I love this. This is what I miss.
I just rippled this guy.
That's okay. It's all
I
good,
think you
man.
broke him.
It's all good, man. This is what I miss.
But getting back to the scenario, but when they take this bank robber down and his cohorts,
Right.
10 people get killed.
Right.
You save 40 lives, but you lose 10.
Mm-hmm.
Are those at acceptable odds?
Yeah. And
is that a win?
Well, morally.
Okay. But see, that's what, what constitutes a win. And this is just food for thought. I don't really need a feedback.
But
this is what I want to get at is what can you accept as a win?
Right.
Why are we judging it as a win?
Because this falls on ethics. Was
what turned out was that losing those 10 people, was that an acceptable loss even when you took down the bad guys,
Mhm.
which considerably is a win because you took down the bad guys.
Okay. Let
But
me.
the collateral damage of losing 10 people, is that an acceptable loss
Okay. Let me.
as a negotiator?
Okay. I'm going to use something that's maybe hopefully similar. That's kind of with that. That when I was in medical assistant school, okay, we talked about ethics and morals here, right? And that when a person goes in for surgery, all right, say and it's a high risk surgery. Okay. Same thing as the scenario for the hostages. All right. And that the surgery is high risk with cancer. Okay. And it's near some very delicate organs and vessels. All right. And in the coronary system.
One
All right.
wrong move and
Okay. So that doctor is the assault team. Okay. Because they are assaulting the cancer, knowing that this possibility exists and everything that was done. And it's an understanding of this possibility because the criminal who's holding hostages understands, but in hopefully a delusion, thinks he may get away because he thinks he has all the control. Now, a cancer,
leverage.
exactly. Now, a cancer, though highly aggressive in some way by nature, hopefully, and I'm trying to read the mind of a cancer cell here, is, though very powerful and very detrimental, and if not gotten all the way through, can still return. Okay. So, which means the person who is on the table may be on the table longer than necessary due to complications.
Or
Okay.
may not make it off that table alive.
Okay. So you have the same scenario with the hostages. Okay. Ethically, what's the responsibility? Because the person that is in there holding hostages, as the cancer cell is holding the body hostage in a sense, it's doing what it does. That's its nature. Okay. You have a person that may have changed their character or changed their nature to become this criminal. What are the circumstances?
I'm going to need to wrap this up, but I've got something to throw at you afterwards.
Sure.
Afterwards.
Okay. All right. So I tell you what, with that being said, with that open-ended question, let's call this, and this will be food for thought for people.
Exactly.
And normally I like to leave things with a solid ending if possible. But today, I think
it's appropriate
with these questions and presentations of scenarios and possibilities of solutions, I think this one today is good where it is. Thank you, James. And I've appreciated you being here. This added something back that I've been missing. You've been missed. Thank you. Okay. Now let's cut the recording.